Did you know that you can make vegan mayo by emulsifying aquafaba like you would eggs with oil? And we're back. More chickpea recipes. Hello, I'm Liv, and welcome to the Leopard Lodge. This is part 2 of 6 things to do with a can of chickpeas. In part 1, we made a cocktail with aquafaba, the liquid in the can of beans that is an egg white substitute, crispy chickpeas that will be used as a topper in one of today's salads, and we did a chickpea tomato bruschetta with a bonus recipe, hummus. So if you missed part 1, stop what you're doing, or I guess you could watch it after this. It probably doesn't make a difference. Our first recipe is vegan Cesar made with aquafaba mayo. No, I am not vegan. I am not even vegetarian, but I do think that reducing our reliance on animal products is probably a good idea. Plus, this is cheaper, so there's that. Did you know that you can make vegan mayo by emulsifying aquafaba and oil together like you would with eggs and oil to make regular mayo? Because I did not. But I was noodling around for this episode and I was like, is that a thing? Could that be a thing? And I went on trusty Google, and in fact, it was a thing, so I gave it a shot. The process is actually very similar. I didn't measure my oil, I kind of eyeballed it, but a quarter cup of aquafaba can take roughly 3/4 cup to 1 full cup of oil, just like an egg yolk. Put the blender on its lowest setting and start streaming in the oil. Just like when I made classic egg-based mayo, I started with some neutral oil, and then I moved to olive oil, about half and half of each. I do really think the vigorousness of a blender is important here, but if you only have a food processor, give it a shot. Let me know in the comments if you do and how it turned out. Once I felt satisfied with the color and thickness of the mayo, I put the lid on and started turning the blender up to high and let it whisk for about a minute just to really get it to be that thick mayo texture. This is me whisking. And there you have a very basic vegan mayo, which tastes shockingly like regular mayo. For all intents and purposes though, it tastes a lot like mayo. If you're gonna use this just as mayo, I would add some flavors to it, maybe some garlic, maybe some lemon. And if that doesn't deserve a thumbs up, then I don't know what does. But we are making Caesar salad after all. So I added a tablespoon of capers, a quarter cup of nutritional yeast, a teaspoon of lemon juice, a teaspoon of red wine vinegar, half a teaspoon of miso, ideally chickpea miso if you can get it, half a teaspoon of shoyu or tamari, and it wouldn't be a Leopard Lodge recipe without grated garlic, about a clove to taste. Lots of black pepper, salt to taste. Blend again until well incorporated. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but as well as you can get it. This may require another little splash of aquafaba to loosen it up a little bit. Uncanny. Personally, I prefer kale in my Caesar salads. If you're wondering how to de-spine kale quickly, I just find it to be a little bit more interesting and nutritious. But if you miss that crunch of the romaine, I understand, and you do you. Chop your kale into thin strips and place in a bowl. In order to get the dressing to adhere to the kale better, I'm going to pour some olive oil on it and a little salt and then do the dressing. Kale wants salt too. Give everything a bit of a massage. This helps break down the kale, making it a little bit less bitter and easier to chew. At this point, you can add the dressing and give everything a mix. I prefer to use my hands when I do this, but I understand that this might be a weird tactile thing for some people, and you can use tongs if you would like. I used about 1.5 bunches of kale for half of my dressing, and this fed 4 people as a side salad accompaniment to dinner. Finish off the salad with the crispy chickpeas that we covered in part 1. The chickpea galette. A galette is basically a rustic tart/pie. This is not an episode on how to make galette crust, nor am I a master baker, so I used the Tartine Cookbook to help me out. While I do think this makes a lovely dough, I do not recommend this recipe unless you are a fairly confident baker, because it is quite involved. So find yourself a galette recipe, or buy some phyllo dough, or buy a frozen crust, and we'll come back to the crust in a little bit. Start off by peeling the skins off of a bunch of carrots. Put those peels in your veggie stock bag in your freezer. Oh, am I the only one who does that? Well, it's a great tip, but also you can compost it or put it in your trash. Using that same peeler, go back and make more strips, going as deep as you can to get long, slightly thicker ribbons of carrot. Focus on one side until you get close to the center, and then flip, doing the reverse side. Eventually you will get to a point where it's difficult to continue making these ribbons. So set the rest of the carrot aside and dip it in hummus as a snack. Place in a bowl with a can of rinsed and drained chickpeas. Add chopped up scallions, season with olive oil, a few splashes of red wine vinegar, some sumac, some chili flakes, salt, pepper. Roll out your dough into a circle or rectangle. Cut off any awkward bits and attempt to make yourself a weird treat for later. The beautiful thing about galettes is that they are rustic. They do not need to be a perfect shape or size. Place parchment paper on a baking sheet and transfer the rolled out dough. Top the dough with the carrot chickpea mixture. Add crumbled feta, which I mixed in on the actual dough, but probably would have been easier to do in a bowl. Begin cinching up the edges of your crust to create a nice layered look. You kind of want to fold the edges over themselves slightly on to the ingredients, but not covering them too much. You have the opportunity to get as neat or as rustic as you would like. So if you want a more perfect edge, you could trim some of the dough off, but I don't like to waste, so I just go for it. Put the galette in your fridge while you preheat the oven for 10 to 20 minutes. This will allow the butter to chill back up, resulting in a flakier crust. In a small bowl, combine an egg with a tablespoon of cream and give it a whisk. When your oven is preheated according to your dough's recipe, brush the edges with the egg cream mixture. Sprinkle with sesame seeds, a bit of mild chili flake if you like, and a bit of flaky salt. Bake according to your recipe's instructions. Top with leaves of fresh cilantro. Serve warm or at room temperature. A fun breakfast idea is to reheat a leftover piece of this and then pop an egg on it. Chickpeas and cookies. The cookies. I am not going to lie to you. I had 3 failed attempts to make a dessert out of chickpeas. It was a slightly frustrating situation, but I was determined to make something out of the physical chickpeas. I briefly thought about doing a chickpea flour dessert, and sure, an obvious choice might have been aquafaba meringue, but I became really determined to use the actual bean. I finally got frustrated enough at trying to create my own recipes that I leaned on the Tartine Cookbook for some help. Taking their peanut butter cookie recipe, I made some adjustments. And well, I think it turned out pretty good. So the first thing you're going to want to do is brown a stick of butter, which happens to be half a cup. This is completely optional. You could just use regular room temperature butter, but I feel that the browned butter really adds a lovely depth of flavor. After being melted, the butter needs to come back to room temperature. You can speed this up by sticking it in the freezer, but don't let it go too far in the other direction. In the meantime, blend half a cup of chickpeas with enough aquafaba to create a peanut butter-like texture. Set this aside. In a new bowl, combine 60 grams of all-purpose flour, or 2 cups. I prefer to weigh my ingredients when I bake. Kitchen scale is an excellent thing to invest in because I think it produces a more consistent result. 1 teaspoon of baking powder, half a teaspoon of baking soda. Sift this all together and set it aside. Once your butter is back to room temperature, add to the bowl 200 grams of light brown sugar, about a cup and 2 tablespoons. 115 grams of the chickpea puree, which is about half a cup. 2 tablespoons of honey, 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Beat this for about a minute on medium. If you have a stand mixer, use the paddle attachment for best results. I'll just be over here struggling with my hand mixer. Add 1 egg mix, followed by an egg yolk. Mix again. 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract, 2 tablespoons of milk. Mix to incorporate everything. If you are using a stand mixer, turn it down to low and slowly incorporate the flour mixture. If you are going old school like me, ditch the hand mixer, get out a wooden spoon, and start mixing in that flour. Mix until well incorporated. Weigh out roughly 160 grams of chocolate, or the rest of the chocolate that's in your house. Chop coarsely. You can use chocolate chips if you'd like, but I think the variation in size of the chunks makes for a more interesting cookie. Incorporate the chocolate chunks into the dough, cover with plastic wrap or a lid, and chill in the fridge for 2 hours or overnight. Or, if you're impatient like me, put it in the freezer for an hour to speed it up, and then actually not end up baking the cookies until the next day. When ready to bake, preheat the oven to 350 degrees. In a bowl, combine 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds, 1 teaspoon of flaky salt. Mix. Line a baking tray with parchment paper. Spoon out small amounts of dough and form into balls, and then roll into the salt, sugar, sesame mixture. The balls should be about 1 inch in diameter. Using a fork, press firmly down to create hash marks in the top of the cookie, or just kind of use something to flatten them. Bake for about 15 minutes until perfectly golden brown and slightly crispy on the edges. Let cool on a rack for at least 5 minutes before consuming. No satisfying chocolate pull. Sorry, folks. Normally I'd probably cut a recipe like this in half, but it was tricky to do because there was an egg and an egg yolk, and you can't really split those things in half. But I also don't need a million cookies at one time, or I will eat all of them. I'm gonna take some to work and try to pass them off on my coworkers. So you can, of course, freeze half of this dough in an airtight container for up to a couple of weeks. And that concludes our chickpea series. Although I have to say, I have a few more ideas. So who knows, maybe there'll be a part 3. If you enjoyed this content, you have the opportunity to buy me a coffee in the link below, or just share it with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time at the Leopard Lodge. Some milk. Some chocolate in my teeth.